Now we are going to discuss the third part of cognitivism, that is the competition model and the associative cognitive creed theory. The competition model is a psycholinguistic theory of language acquisition and sentence processing. It was developed by Elizabeth Bates and Brian McWhinney. Both are psychologists, and they have a lot of contribution in the area of cognitive sciences. Now, this model describes language development in formal as well as in the informal settings. Basically, it emphasizes the role of cognitive mechanism that occurs in the learner's brain when processing a language. So, the area of focus is what happens in the mind, or what we can consider as the cognition, when a learner is exposed to a language and starts processing that language. So basically, the cognition or the cognitive process, the complete cognitive mechanism, is what is the key understanding of this particular model. McWhinney considers the three parameters or three factors important for this model. They are input, learner, and context. These are considered as three main components in language learning processes. With regard to input, it is the factor that contains all the linguistic cues, which means the complete database or the factors which constitutes one's linguistic understanding. It can be morphemes, it can be phonemes, gestures as well. So basically, the complete linguistic data. Linguistic cues are processed in learner's brain. And then the context, where processing occurs at the sentence level, where linguistic cues compete to bring about the appropriate interpretation of the cues. So there are different cues, different information available in the mind, and the process compete with all those cues to bring about the appropriate understanding or the appropriate response to a particular piece of information. The competition model presents a functionalist and connectionist view. So basically, the idea is to look at when context is involved, then the functional aspect of language comes in. So basically, the functionalist and the connectionist, that how cues are connected or linked to come up with complete understanding. These view of both first and second language learning that attributes development of learning and transfer rather than to the principles and parameters of universal grammar, which simply focuses on the innateness. But these two approaches primarily focus on the learning, development of the learning and the transfer. It's not that just the innate knowledge which is there, but how the knowledge is transferred and how the learning is processed, considering the context as well as the cognitive aspects. Key theoretical issues of these models are: number one, lexical functionalism. The basic claim of functionalism is that the forms of language are determined and shaped by the communicative functions to which they are placed. So here again, the communicative function is the area of importance. As for this particular point is concerned, the pressure of communicative function operating in accord with the constraints of neuro-linguistic processing is considered to be the primary determinant of language development, processing, and evolution. Connectionism. The competition model uses connectionist model with transfer as the important feature. In order to model the interactions between lexical mappings. The connection or the computation model uses connectionist models. 4 important properties of these neural network systems are competition, gradients, emergence, and transfer. Now, of these 4 properties, the most important for understanding second language acquisition is the transfer. Third issue is with regard to input-driven learning. It emphasizes the role of the input rather than innate principles of parameters. The 4th point is the use of language in real time is continually subject to potential capacity limitations in terms of short-term verbal memory. Because of its function or functionalist orientation, the computation model focuses on the role of underlying conceptual interpretation in determining the utilization of processing capacity. Now we are going to see how the associative cognitive creed theory is different from the computation model. This theory in SLA was introduced by Nick Ellis. According to this theory, language is learned in the same way as any other human skill. This theory is based on both the behavioral, which are specific to associations, and cognitivist, which means the cognitive traditions. The key principles of associative cognitive creed theory are the construction grammar, the relational language processing, exemplar-based abstraction and attraction, emergent relations and patterns, and the 5th principle is dialectic. Now, looking at the construction grammar, we see that language constructions in the form of form-function mapping. These form-function mapping are contextualized within the environment and are processed in the learner's brain. Rational language processing, where the learner are required to determine the relevant language construction in the input and process them. So basically, looking at the relevant language construction is what we mean by rational language processing. Exemplar-based abstraction and attraction means that learners store many exemplars in their brains and process abstract information, which is generalization, based on the frequency with which they are heard. So basically, a learner has lot of exemplars in the brain. But and generalization is there in the form of processing abstract information, and all depends on the frequency with which they are heard. Emergent relations and pattern refers to interference from the learner's first language that hinders the process of second language learning. Now, this is a very popular myth or a fact, you can call it. It's open to discussion and lot of research that the first language interference hinders the process of second language learning. Dialectic means explicit instructions to second language acquisition to discourage interlanguage system. So interlanguage system is basically the language which is formed when the learner is moving from his or her native language to acquiring of the linguistic analysis or linguistic knowledge of second language, and he or she forms an interlanguage based on the first language rules and the second language. Now, this particular point refers to giving the explicit instructions of second language acquisition so that there is no interlanguage system. To conclude, the competition model has functionalist perspective and refers to the processing of linguistic cues and consider functions and forms not separated, but rather forms are associated with function during communication. Associative cognitive theory refers to occurrences of cognitive mechanism in learner's brain and working on associations in language processing respectively.